This is the instructor's overview for Chapter 19, Seizing an American Empire. In this chapter, the textbook discusses how the United States became actively engaged abroad, looking carefully at American foreign policy. Sometimes the United States engaged with its military in foreign nations to protect our economic interests abroad, such as in Nicaragua and Guatemala. Other times, the United States acquired colonies. Colonies are territories that are politically and militarily controlled by the United States, but the people there were not made citizens, so they could not vote for the government that was controlling their region. Now, for the United States to do this, there has to be a good reason. The acquiring of colonies was contrary to the American political system. In fact, the United States had once been a collection of colonies that had fought a war of independence against England. So built into the political system was self-determination, the notion that citizens, the people living within the nation, shape their government and choose their political representatives through a democratic process. So the acquisition of colonies was contrary to that principle. Many Americans opposed imperialism for that reason. However, there were strong justifications for imperialism, the first of which was an economic justification. The United States was searching for markets or places to sell their industrial goods abroad. We've talked in the last couple weeks about the economic expansion of the United States. And in this chart, you can see how the United States emerged as the world economic superpower by 1913. By 1913, the United States controlled almost 36% of economic power in the world, and they had displaced Great Britain as the primary economic superpower. So the United States was producing a large amount of goods, and they needed a place to sell those goods. They look, for instance, to trade with China. That is one of their main goals, is to establish and build a strong trade with China. Island colonies, then, places along the way like Hawaii, Guam, the Philippines, those could be used as coaling stations, places where the ships that were traveling back and forth with all these goods could stop and recoal or get fresh water or do repairs. They could also serve as naval bases, places from which the United States could protect that trade that is going abroad. And the textbook talks about Alfred Thayer Mahan and his theories about these Pacific islands. So the United States was trying to sell its industrial goods abroad, but it was also trying to sell its agricultural produce. So in this advertisement for a range or a stove, you can see Uncle Sam is there, and he's having the world over for dinner. And the world has a long list of things that it would like to buy from the United States, American produce, that it wants to eat and purchase. So the United States was anxious to sell its agricultural produce abroad as well. Seated at the table are 3 children. Those children represent American colonies. And the United States often depicted colonies as the children of the nation, like a paternalistic relationship. We were the parents and they were our children. The United States also expanded abroad in order to increase its power, but also to increase its international reputation. The United States was an economic superpower, but we were not yet seen as a military superpower. And at this time, European nations were building colonial empires that were far larger than ours. The European nations carved up Africa. Nearly all of Africa was colonized by Europe at this time. And you can see on this map these large colonial areas claimed by France, Germany, Great Britain, Belgium. They also colonized within Asia. So if this is what the great Western powers were doing, and the United States wanted to be recognized as a great Western power, it too was going to require colonies. Ideas about race also justified imperial expansion. We have talked in the past about social Darwinism, which led to these ideas of hierarchies of races and hierarchies of people. Some people believed that nations were, some were powerful, some were weak, and much like Darwin argued that there was survival of the fittest within animal species, they argued that there was survival of the fittest amongst nations, and that powerful nations like the United States were destined to dominate weaker nations like, say, Puerto Rico or Hawaii. And finally, connected to this was the missionary impulse, this notion that the United States wasn't just going to conquer these places, but for racist reasons they saw the societies there as lesser, as weaker, and our goal was to uplift them, to teach them American lifestyles, American political systems, teach them about capitalism. So in this political cartoon, we see Uncle Sam representing the United States as a teacher, and the children in the classroom are the colonies. And the textbook talks about the colonial reaction to American involvement. So we can see here the children behaving in different ways. Some of the children, with it labeled in their hats, the girls sitting to the right, are learning their studies. They're not resisting American instruction. That's Puerto Rico, I believe, in Hawaii. And then some of the colonies are fighting and pushing back. The colony, the child in the corner, represents the Philippines, and on his hat it says Aguinaldo, who led a Philippine rebellion against the United States. So keep in mind, although the United States perceives the colonies as children, of course these colonies did not want to be conquered. They were perfectly happy with their societies and their ways of life. So we justify it by explaining it in a way that makes it okay in our minds, that it's okay because we're spreading the good of American civilization. However, it really was conquest. The textbook then proceeds to describe how the United States acquired the colonies. It talks about Alaska, and it moves into the Spanish-American War. The war was fought in both Cuba and the Philippines, and the textbook explains what happens in Cuba after the war. After the war, the United States annexes the Philippines as American territory and does not make the people living there citizens. The Filipinos, however, resisted American control in their nation, and we fought a war for several years that was a very difficult war with many more losses of life than in the Spanish-American War. However, the Philippines were defeated, and the United States did control the territory. The textbook concludes with talking about the foreign policies of Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Theodore Roosevelt's foreign policy is often called the Big Stick policy. He envisioned the United States as a policeman, and the United States was going to both, here we can see him kind of straddling the world here, and he's keeping Europeans and other continents out of the Americas, but then he's also going to control what's happening in the Americas. And this vision of the United States as a policeman, again, it justified American involvement in Latin America. So I hope you enjoyed this chapter. It's a really interesting chapter, and have a good week.